Well, hello, and today we're going to look at moving using a step. We're going to continue working with our We're going to continue working with our testing structure type movement, but we're going to extend it now into a slightly more difficult ask, and that's using it with a step. And there are various things that we're going to learn about that, not least that it adds an extra level of difficulty when we start using a step, that it adds something to the movement. And for that reason, we're going to start primarily by looking at elbows rather than punches, because when we do a step with punch, it adds too much into the movement at the moment for us to work on. We want to build step by step up into that. So we're going to look primarily at elbows, and that's going to teach us some really useful stuff. So there's something very important that Wang Shangjai emphasizes, that when we teach, we want to teach both the intuitive ability to use our physical bodies, but at the same time to develop a scientific understanding of what it is we're doing, why it works in the way that it does, and also the ability to look at what other people are doing and scientifically analyse what they're doing. This is a very important concept. So we've got lots of people, of course, who are like, oh, you don't need to do any of that, you just need to develop your own intuitive ability, and we don't need all of that highfalutin complex knowledge. And that, of course, directly contradicts the teaching of Wang Shangjai, which is not necessarily wrong. You know, if Wang Shangjai is wrong about something, you can contradict it. He says that himself. Question is he wrong about this? And well, it's not as straightforward as it might seem initially. So Wang Shangjai makes this very important argument that the problem is in the teacher and in the teaching, and when you come to teach. So the thing about Yiquan is, I know everyone wants to belong to something. It's, I'm not going to say human nature, but it's a very human thing to want to belong. And for that reason, we very often want to go along and just buy into stuff, agree with stuff. Whereas Yiquan's, the rebels are, Yiquan's highly contradictory. And you've got to get into this mindset of being contradictory. And I mean, it's another of Wang Shangjai's ideas that I call the mirror world. He doesn't use that phrase, but he says that within Chinese martial arts, most of the things that present themselves as being really virtuous and good are actually really corrupt and wrong. And he extends from this whole contradictory worldview of like turning everything on its head and thinking about it in different ways. That feeds through conceptually, as I've talked about before, in lots of different ways, in looking at old wushu concepts and reinterpreting them in different ways. But he makes this very important argument, and we can sum it up by saying that as an Yiquan practitioner, you have a series of enemies that you've got to kind of overcome. And the first and most implacable and difficult to get past enemy of all is your teacher. Your teacher's like a parent who's well-meaning, but nevertheless, as well as everything good that a parent passes on, they also pass on some stuff that isn't good. And Wang Shangjai makes this argument that the key problem in traditional wushu was the teacher-to-student relationship, and he problematizes this in multiple different ways. And I know it's super contradictory. It's like all those people who, they've got their certificates, and each one's the worst for it, I've got my certificate, do you know who my teacher was? I don't care. I only care about your level, Who your teacher was might be historically interesting, but it's trivia. It's your level that matters. But Wang Shangjai drills it down into something much more important, and he says that, he says a number of things that's wrong with the relationship, particularly the master-student relationship. So he abolishes the concept of master. He abolishes the title of master. It's quite problematic to see Yiquan practitioners using titles like Sifu and Master when Wang Shangjai abolished those explicitly, and for very good reason. And he also says, like, when he calls it a kind of slave relationship, so he doesn't like the whole traditional relationship, but he says, just in practical terms, you can't discuss the nitty-gritty of fight science if you're always like, you've just got to accept what your teacher says. But he makes this very important argument and says, the problem is, okay, you might be really, really good, but if you don't understand what you're doing, then your explanations for it are wrong. And you teach those wrong explanations to your students, and they can't get it because they're trying to follow an explanation that was wrong. So yes, okay, it's absolutely fine if you personally just develop intuitive ability and you don't use any conceptualization whatsoever, you can just do it. But when you come to teach it, then it's a problem. And Wang Shangjai identifies this as a problem that runs all the way through Chinese wushu, that the people who are really, really high level haven't got an equivalent conceptual or scientific level to be able to codify this and pass it on in a way that's free from ideas that just don't make sense and don't really work and don't really function, and then it just leads to degradation through the arts within, you know, a couple of generations. People can neither do it nor explain it. So that's very much the basis of the Yiquan revolution, that it was designed to kind of redress that balance. So we need to understand things conceptually as well as intuitively. So to cut a long story short, we need both. We need intuitive development of knowledge, and we need also some kind, if we want to pass it on as a system, as something that people can learn and that continues to grow and is based on actual principles of some kind of science or justifiable and demonstrable base of knowledge and understanding of movement, then we need conceptualization to work with that stuff. So reject all of that nonsense, all of those people who say, the only reason to start saying things like essence of each one is bow, which I'll talk about in a moment, and you can only feel this by touching someone else. The only reason to emphasize that is it's just easier to brainwash people, or not brainwash, but make them go along, because people are so desperate to belong, to make them go along with, oh, can you feel me moving you? Oh yeah, you know, and you just go along with it because you want to be part of the group. It's much easier to do that in person. Anyway, so we're going to start by looking at, I'm going to think about elbows, and what we're going to think about first of all, conceptually, is this idea of bow, which is a profound idea, but as I'll talk about in a moment, how it's, you know, profound and foundation is not the same thing as advanced. But bow means embrace, so in Mandarin. So the idea of this roundedness, this rounded posture that I've talked about extensively, that it contains stored force, i.e. you can move from this in multiple, maybe not infinite, you know, maybe things start to change a little bit if you start rolling about on the floor, and it's got to be adapted as a concept. But in this kind of stand-up movement, as far as possible, using this rounded, embracing type shape, and that our structural paradigm emanates from this concept of bow. It's like a foundation. You drill it right down into this very mysterious. Is it mysterious? I don't know. It's profound, not mysterious. It's profound. It's something you can explore, beginning obviously with this and everything we've talked about when I first started talking about this standing posture, that everything then emanates from this foundation concept. But like everything, it's that simple, but it's that complicated. So there's things around the idea of bow. So one of the things we want to talk about today is force distribution. And I'll emphasize also that what a significantly more profound concept bow is than this idea of kinetic change. This is useful in a tiny number of cases, but is otherwise quite a trivial concept. So the first thing we want to think of is, like, if I hit with a jab like that, I'm still using this concept of bow, this rounded, hug-like, embrace-like movement. But one of the things that we started talking about immediately when we initially started using the bag was the distribution of force, and the way that Hun Yuan Li and our overall springy body consistency not only transmits force into a target, but also releases force back. And that then links into this idea of configurational consistency, that we're generating force from far Li. And remember, also rejecting this very superstitious idea that power comes from the ground in each one. And we go, yeah, okay, if I lean and push in and I push from my foot like that, then you can say in some sense, you know, like power's coming from the ground. But when we change that to moving around the axis like that, the power isn't coming from the ground. You can look, even like just the fact that I'm leaning back this way means that I'm not really pushing forward like into a punch like that. I'm not bracing it like that forwards. Like with this jab, I'm moving backwards. And we've talked about in our understanding, our conceptual understanding of setting a posture, that when we set the posture with the feet, that we solidify the structure, and that allows force transmission into the target. Sorry, my voice is a little bit, I'm full of a cold, so that explains I've got a bit of a strange voice. I'm sure my accent sounds strange anyway to people who aren't used to it. The forces from the Farley, whatever kind of Farley that we use, the forces from Farley, and what happens with the ground is it just sets the posture. And we know this for lots of different reasons, not least, like, you know, here I'm moving back, there's no force really coming from that foot there, it's just setting the configuration. If I do something like a step in with a jab, I haven't got enough room, I'll do an elbow swipe. Force comes from the far lee around the axis, like that. And at the point of hitting, the back foot sets into the posture. And what that does is it creates stability in the posture. It's not like I'm stamping and pushing as hard as I can off the floor like that. And you can even see in the most extreme examples, like really good barge Yiquan, that force doesn't come from the ground. It just sets the posture really, really hard, i.e. the consistency of the posture at the point where you hit the target. However, some interesting things start happening that combine all these elements together when we move from a jab, say, to an elbow. And what do we do with the elbow that's different? Well, we take out the joints here and here. So even though we're hitting with the elbow, really this joint doesn't do very much. Also, we can include these joints as well in the knuckles. So when we hit, these also do something when they pull in, like breaking an egg, like that. They add something to the movement, like that. And we want this consistency when we hit, and it's all got to be managed. Each of these joints can dissipate force that we otherwise want to go into the target. We don't want to hit like really loose. I've talked before about, very often when you hit, your elbow might come up or something like that because the force that's going into the target has got to go somewhere, and if it can't go in the target, it's got to go somewhere in the body. So we want all this force, we want to increase the level of tension in our body, and we also don't, I heard someone saying, like, before you punch you should be as relaxed as possible. So I ideally here, you should be completely relaxed and then punch. That's okay as a training exercise, so like doing that kind of standing. But the reality is you're not completely relaxed. If you're completely relaxed, you'd just be lay on the floor. So obviously there's already tensional consistency in the body just by standing like that. As an exercise, we can do it like standing, very relaxed, and with lots of things like that. But when you come to sparring or fighting, you can't do that. You can't be completely relaxed in your body. And again, that directly contradicts the teaching of Wang Xiangjia, who says you've got to have this springy consistency, so that as soon as something hits, you've got resilience to the body. So we're after like a combination of relaxation and tension. And then when we bring it up to the hit point, we bring it up 85% tension. It's all stuff that we've looked at before. But that bodily consistency then has to distribute that force throughout the body. And one of the things that we're doing in this kind of testing structure movement is looking for points of looseness where force is being unnecessarily dissipated because the structure has got a weak point. And then we're correcting that so that more of the force can be directed into the back. It's a fairly straightforward concept. But nevertheless, force is being distributed, and the more limbs and joints that are involved, the more complex the calculation is. A bit like the three-body problem. The idea that when you've got three bodies moving together, that there's kind of like an infinite number of possible ways that they can move. You need a supercomputer like the intent to manage this. So when we hit like this, we've got all these points of force distribution that can hit, and it makes it a more difficult configuration to hold, and it also makes it less powerful. And this explains, for example, when you hit with the elbow like that, it feels so much more solid because it hasn't got these two joints for force to be dissipated. And even if you feel like it's a really solid structure when you jab, nevertheless a lot of force is being inevitably lost through these joints. It's just inevitable. But when we change like that, we don't feel that. It just feels really, really solid, whole solid structure like that. And this begins to teach us some really interesting things. Well, it teaches a few really interesting things. So the first thing is this idea of bow. This is bow, it's still embrace posture, and this is bow, it's still embrace posture, but they're different modes of force distribution based on the amount of working parts that are involved. So bow is not just bow by any means. And you have to separate that from the people who've reduced bow to some kind of mystical concept, again directly contradictory to the teachings of Wang Xiangjia. And the reason people do that is they want something really, really simple, so that they themselves never have to display any kind of practical skill. They can just say, I've got bow, let's bow. You see all this kind of thing when they put their hands on you and move you like that really matters. I mean, try doing that to a catch wrestler. Oh, I've got bow. Well, yeah. When you wake up from the neck crank or whatever, then talk about bow. But at the same time, they want something so misleading and mystical and complex that you'll be forever trying to pursue it, trying to understand it in the wrong way. The only way to understand bow is in the practical way, through honest, practical fight training. So this is bow, but this is much more solid structure, and that teaches us a lot about structural configuration and now this key concept of force distribution, that different kinds of postures have different kinds of force distribution. The less moving parts that are involved, the more solid the force distribution is. Even when we get down to like just hitting him with the shoulder or something like that, it's so bad, and you can get all the force behind it like that. And then there's another balance between Farley and force distribution and how we do that. So we're always trying to maximize our power generation, and that requires compromises. So sometimes you've got to do a bigger Farley to compromise for the poorer force distribution, that it dissipates force. Then other times, if the structure is more solid, we can have a smaller Farley and get the same effect because the force distribution is much more efficient. It's not being lost through these joints. I think that's reasonably straightforward, and you can certainly feel it practically. So again, it fulfills this idea that we want, that yeah, you can train it intuitively and you can explain it conceptually. And that's what we want to begin with, that exercise from a jab into an elbow using a step. And that's going to also teach you some interesting things about steps. So the first thing we need, if we're going to do this combination 1, 2, is the step with the elbow itself. So remember that we talked about the idea that we need to use this stance as a basic unit, a unit of measurement. And it becomes like the intense unit of measurement that it works with. 1 unit, 2 units. And then we combine that with an elbow 1 like that. It's slightly more difficult than it looks, I have to say, because you need to time it so that as it hits the bag, it hits the foot hits the floor at the same time with the sequence step. And that just gives a little bit of an extra difficulty to the posture itself and maintaining the overall structural configuration. We'll do it up to the hit and stop and just practice a few like that. So nice and relaxed first. Then we can bring up the power levels, make it a little bit sharper. Still really, really relaxed. So it's the posture that we try to train, the overall postural consistency, rather than the technique itself as such. And that's a very different way of thinking about training martial arts to what you usually see. The same kind of thing the other way. And you can feel it in yourself. If this isn't harmonised right, you can feel the loss of power, that it becomes another way that there's a disconnect between the force distribution. That if you step and then elbow, or elbow and then step, that's the worst. If you elbow and step, you can really feel the loss of the solidity of the movement. So, but when you get them spot on, you can feel that the structural consistency and force distribution is much more solid. Obviously, that massively aids power. It's not even about power generation, it's about power distribution. So the force is going to come from the far lead round the axis, but when it hits, the structure's got to be solid to transmit that force, all the stuff that we've been talking about. So you need to practice that, practicing the step and hitting the object like that, nice and relaxed. You don't need to go too far around that. Then the next thing we want to do is start combining this with a punch and an elbow. And there's 2 ways we can do this. First of all, again, it's good for range control. It's just building the task that the intent is doing. So 1 down, then 2 in with the elbow. I'll do some the other way. 1, down, 2, down. 1, down, 2, down. 1, down, 2, down. I'm just practicing very, very light like that and just building up. You're training your ability to range the techniques as much as you're training the postures and the consistency, so being quite disciplined about that. Then we want to change it a little bit, so there's some interesting things that we can do here. And we want to use, first of all, what we call a quarter root step. So we know what a quarter root is now, like where we go 1 and it doesn't come all the way down, it changes into another technique. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. It just goes like that. When we want to use it for a step, then something a little bit different starts happening, because we want to go for, particularly in this instance, we want to go for jab, and the quarter root comes up like that, so that it's pointing that way. But we want to step that way with a seeking step, so it's got to come back and step like that. So 1, down, and then change into the elbow strike, and that's much more difficult than it looks, because we're now used to going quarter rooting like 1, 2, 1, 2, and that's quite easy to do. And we've practiced our seeking step like that, just practicing 1, 2. Now we want to combine them into a step. It's just a whole different ball game. So 1, 2, then 3, like that. 1, 2, so it's pointing flat and then goes forward flat into the seeking step. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. The other way. 1, it's pointing that way, changes down, but the whole body, the whole structure comes down as well. 1, 2, see, we're just, again, this is our concept of storing force. We're just putting more force back into the body and then changing into the elbow like that. And if we can get this step like this, then we can use it with 1,001 different things. It's just a matter of being disciplined with it. So 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. So if we've got that, we've practiced that, then we can just start bringing it up, just getting it a little bit sharper. Just a little bit. Still nowhere near full speed and power, just a little bit. And we build that like that, then maybe just take it up a level of sharpness, but still not really utilising power. Keeping the structure quite loose, and by now we should be developing the ability to change the amount of force that we put into the posture just by intuitively changing the degree of configurational consistency. By making the postures looser in the joints, we can start reducing the amount of power that we put in, and we can start deciding the ratio of power that we put into the, it's the kind of thing when we're sparring. We just keep the joints, particularly the hand joints, just keep everything a little bit looser. More of the force is distributed back into your own body. That's why you also need to do back work at full power, so that you don't just do that habitually, but you can choose how you distribute force through the body, and that's a skill that then leads into multiple different other really, really useful higher level body function controls that we're going to need later on. And you're going to see there's differences then, depending on how far, with a bag like this moving, depending on how far away it is and how near it is, there's going to be differences in how far your footwork needs to adapt. So you're going to feel all those little differences. Again, it's training everything to a higher level of range control. And the other benefit of training like this really light, if you're getting it right, is feeling the difference in Farley, that you can do a bigger, you can do a smaller movement for the elbow and get a similar amount of power. And I know you think like intuitively, like, I want to do maximum power, I want to do maximum Farley for the elbow, do maximum damage. But the problem is it's so close that you haven't got that time to do it, you haven't got the space to do that. So you just use a smaller Farley movement, but you get the same amount of power because the structural force distribution is superior because you're using less joints. So a couple more. In like that. I'm trying to get this bit of the elbow here hitting the bag rather than the forearm. The forearm pushes a little bit of a different, it's a flatter opening round the chest like that, a big open, whereas the elbow is more Farley round the axis but push out the elbow. This limb, part of the limb like a spike, just goes straight into it's a slightly different posture. We talked about that before anyway. Go on Trish. So one of the things that really trains that, so we use hit and flow, but something's going to change in our footwork when we do this. I mean, there's very good reasons for this, and it's everything we've looked about, articulated movement, 1, 2, 3 with the quarter root step. Now we're not going to do that. We're going to go 1 into the punch, and this foot is just going to change straight forward into the seeking step like that, what we call a half moon step. It just goes like round like that into the posture. It's just a different way of doing it when we do hit and flow. Don't worry, you train all of these things, they just become completely intuitive and it doesn't take that long. So we go 1, 2, straight into the 1. The important thing is to get it to slide forward like that, not to go over on the ankle, just slide. It doesn't slide on the floor, but it just changes forward like. From there, it just changes forward like that. 1, 2, 1, and then 2 changes in like that. And that's going to teach us a few things about range control, about power generation, and also about 1, 2. Also about what it was we were talking about earlier that I've forgotten what it was we were talking about, but I know this demonstrates it, so let's just do it. So my heel came up a little bit off the floor then, that just indicates that the posture was balanced a little bit wrong. That's my intent, leaning forward into the posture to generate more force. So training like this really slowly really pulls out those little things and just, it gives you that fine-grained data so that you can correct them. So I'm still using hit and stop even though I'm speeding up the posture. There's no pullback, there's no 1 pullback with the quarter rooted elbow, it's just 1, 2. So we need it trained properly, so in with the hit and stop. There's no force lost by not pulling the posture back like that, obviously, because the posture's going back. So there's no force lost by doing this. It's a perfectly legitimate technique. It just cuts down any time. And the reason we can do this is because we use this sophisticated Wushu concept of stored force. 1, I've still got stored force, and also I'm using compensatory power, i.e. a step, to get my body weight behind the posture, so I'm adding a new dimension in it by using a step like this. Hit and stop. And this is useful as well, the hit and stop in like this. You hit it 1, 2, hit it in. This is what they now call the cage. So you've got your hand on the person's neck or throat or front of the face, preferably under the neck, because if it's on the face you can bite your arm, obviously, if you've got any teeth left after that. Push in with this way, so not just hitting and pulling back, but hitting and then pushing in. So another one of the things that hit and stop is really, really useful for. Same with punches, we could hit and push like that and kind of release force push, or we could hit and push back a little bit like that. It's better with gloves on, there's less rocking about on the face. So yeah, I mean hit and flow. I'm using hit and flow, not hit and stop, hit and flow. So that's hit and stop, but then when we change in like that, that's hit and flow. Hit, so we're hitting and stopping there, then we just flow straight into the next posture like that. Hit and flow. Flow straight into the next one, so a key principle that we draw from Tai Chi. Like that, and the other way. Hit and flow. Hit and flow, range control, step, configurational force, distribution. Bob's your uncle. And you can see when the elbow hits, the foot still, even though it goes forward with the seeking step, it still turns in a little bit with the punch. And remember, I talked about that on certain postures, that happens when you're using the rotational axis like this, that the front foot turns in a little bit. That's absolutely fine, as long as you're stepping forward with the seeking step. An elastic can turn in a little bit like that. It just aids the sympathy of the posture. And it's part of the principle that once you start doing things with more power, all kinds of things start happening, all kinds of changes start taking place that weren't there before. Let's change it up a little bit. So we'll keep making life easier on ourselves, and we'll do the same thing. One overhand, hit and flow, straight into the overhand, the over the top elbow like that, hit and flow, exactly the same thing. Then we'll break it down into the quarter root step. So 1, 2, like that. 1 off the spot, step in over the overhand elbow. 1, 2, a little half moon step forward like that. 1, 2. That's going to look still not full power, just sharp. Up to the hit and stop point. Or we can pull back now, no, it doesn't matter. That one didn't feel so great, so we can do it better. The other way. So, nice and relaxed. That was a flat 1, 2 over top we're doing. See, that's the kind of thing you got to watch out for. There's a little bit of laziness on my part. It wasn't clear that I was doing hit and stop or hit and pull back. I got caught, I got marooned somewhere between. So again, these are really important teaching moments because, well, one, they teach that everyone's making these mistakes. You've got to keep constantly drilling them, thinking about it, working on it. But two, training like this, much more relaxed, really. It gives time for all these mistakes to be highlighted so that you can recognise them. So I want to pull back, and be nice and clean. Or maybe I don't always want to pull back. I just want to stay in close, cage up, change, whatever. So a couple more either way. See, that was too far, my arm came too far, it was too much dead time. Again, teachable moment. I hit, but it came too far. I don't want that. Came too far past the centre line. Adding in a little bit of step, using our infinite curriculum multiplier effect concept that we can just add in 1, 2 and go around like that. If we do add in a little step like that, I think it's absolutely fine to talk about that. We don't want to go with this half moon step. We just want to keep the foot like it is and just step out like that. Really, really simple step. So, like that. hit and flow. Hit and flow. Nice and relaxed. And the other way. So just again, just a little step out. The foot's already like that, it just steps out. 1, 2, and you use as the elbow hits, you just use the step down like that to add down into the posture, into the power generation like that. You can do it on the up on the root like that, or you can drop it in like that. There's 2 different ways of doing it. They're both absolutely fine. This one, it's just a little bit slower and it makes you a bit more flat-footed because if you keep your foot on there, you can pull out a lot quicker than you need to put more weight on the foot because you lose the spring of the joint. If you drop down with the heel, sink the posture and add down into it, you can add more force into it. So if you're thinking like this is one where I'm going to absolutely spark him out with this, it might be worth doing that. But if you're skirmishing, it might be better to just keep on the ball of the foot. Again, you need to practice both. It's my fault. This is the problem when we start going too far ahead, but we're looking at it now anyway. So 1, like that, just using the down with just setting the posture down flat on the root. Like that. If we do it with a quarter root step, just straight on, then it's 1 down, 2 in, like that. The benefit of this, it's a little bit slower, 1, 2, but it gives you a little bit more, 1, because you pull back here, you've just got this much movement more to add into the elbow. Remember, we don't want to go past the centre line, so we don't want to add in more movement by doing that. We don't want to add in more movement by leaning forward like that if we can possibly help it. Anything that makes us vulnerable like that. So this is our limit. So actually this makes a big difference if we can pull back like a little bit more. For the whole body to have that extra amount of movement, it might look like that just all the way down, but actually that's the whole body has got that extra movement. You know, it adds maybe like 10-15% more power on the posture just for that little extra inch of movement just by using the quarter root step. So it's just a little bit slower, you know. And you can see, of course, like you know, a person isn't usually static like that, so you can see the back's moving in there more like a person is. So this idea that, well, actually, we need to generate more power from a smaller space. So it's not determined by just what we want to do; it's determined by the reality of what's happening. If I need to hit someone with an elbow from closer range, like my ability to use force is limited because it's too close. And so I've got to think about how do I generate enough power, and if I can't generate power, how do I distribute that power more efficiently towards the target? What are the things that I can do? So searching for all these little ways. Remember I talked about, you know, it's the essence of each one. Like try to find the most amount of power that you can generate with any particular configuration within the reality of the context of the fight, making it as small as possible. So if we go the other way like that. You can see there's a little pull back like that, one pull back into the thing rather than just one hit and flow like that. One pull back, using the somatic timing, bounce into the hip. It slows the posture down, but it puts more volume into the posture, enables more power. Because the other thing that we're really doing to improve power is adding the compensatory force with the step. That's why we really like elbows with steps. So let's try something different a little bit more. So we'll go with the lead hand. Oh, we haven't done any backhand, have we? So let's think about backhand. So we'll go with the backhand hook, and then we want to step in with a little shuffle with the foot like that. So it's going to be from here, push. Front foot's still going to do seeking step like that. You've got to really be careful you're not lifting up on your heel like that. there's multiple reasons why we don't want to do that. It's overdetermined. So I've talked about the slip risk and how you compensate for that better this way because you can land on your foot. But it's also about how the posture is set. So when we step forward, as we hit, this foot wants to hit the floor like, and that helps to set the posture. Again, this isn't power coming from the floor. When we say set the posture, we're making it more solid so that we can transmit force to the target. So 1, and again we use the quarter root step, but it's from the back foot. We push and set like that on the front foot. Yeah, okay, they're not easy, they're not easy physical movements, but each one's like it's a profound life mission. It's not going to be easy. There's no easy way. So 1, 2, like that. Just up to the hip and stop point. And we use this, it's another really important use of the pivot root. 1, back just a little bit and then springs us forward like that. Little step, little shingy step. Round, and what this does of course is it brings the pivot root round more than it would be for just a straight cross. So round, and the body itself of course, then just a little bit, and then change into the elbow. And this just goes in like a stub, so we're not hitting a cross like that you see totals. So you see this kind of, it skims across the bag, and you see people saying, oh, that's why you can't do elbows on a bag. Each one elbows are different, they go in like a stub like that, so you can. So a little bit sharper, up to the hip and stop. I haven't got quite enough room to do it this way, but I'll try my best. So 1, 2, 3, like that. If I just do it flat. 1, 2, 3. Since the elbow hits, the heel sets on the floor. That's very much an acquired skill. You won't always get it right. Practicing it like this really, really helps. It's all close range, just like half steps for this, just little half steps. And that's partly because it's usually too much to do a big pendulum step, like a big, like that, unless you're just setting it up and you go right in for it, or just in the fly on the moment for the elbow 1, because the elbow's already short range. So if you're thinking I want to get the elbow in like that, it's quite a big step. It's not illegitimate by any means, but for what we want to do at this stage, it's too much. So let's try that with hit and flow. So we're going to go 1 to the hit and stop point, and then I'm just going to change like that straight in. So again, there's going to be no messing about with this heel. It's just going to spring forward. It's just going to spring forward like that. So 1, 2. Just at my maximum range there, which isn't necessarily a bad thing because you can get more. You get a little bit more force on it, but if you go too far, then you really feel it's an uncomfortable movement around the upper body, because you want to keep it all knitted together nice and tight. Again, for the simple reason that if we want more efficient force distribution, it's not just about how many joints are involved, it's about keeping the joints knitted together nice and tight. That's why, really close in hook like that gets more force distribution than a big long hook like that, because there's more force lost through the muscle and the way the muscles are being asked to do more on a longer hook. So Going past the target, you can see change back out like that. So you want to be nice and sharp for like that. If we want to practice the back elbow on its own, we can do it. Only got through to do it this way. Again, just seeking step forward, straight forward, and into the target like that. Look how offline the target is, and if you don't know where, go back and look at the videos on elbows. Our basic elbow is offline like that. So we don't keep it like the foot going. Here's the centre line. We go like that. We go like that, and really close the body up like that. We don't do that unless we're really doing it deliberately, using closing, and usually we'll use a different kind of elbow if we do that. Usually we step out to make the angle like that in each one. It's not a hard and fast rule, but it's a general first principle. So, or we just start offline with the bag like that and just change into the posture. So I'm mindful of being neither too advanced nor too basic. I think like for the most basic things, a lot of things people can work out for themselves. We've only got a limited amount of videos that I can make or that people are even going to want to watch. So, you know, every kind of elbow people can work through the different 1, 2, 1, 2. People can work out. So other things are too advanced, but if we can find the right balance, so just working on some things that are a little bit more challenging is the way I want to go. So let's go with the low shovel hook this way, 1, and then change into the. So we'll do the straight elbow like that. We've got to be careful with the 1, 2. A couple of things to be careful with. You don't want to skin it and take the skin off, and you don't want to thumb yourself in the eye. So 1 from here, and then we just lift straight up the centre line and hit in above like that. And this can be going anywhere. It can be going into the chest, the chin, or the front of the face. It doesn't really matter. We'll do it with the quarter root step first. It's quite, you know, these are all quite close range. You know, remember we started our bag work quite close range. That's why we need steps to learn how to use steps along the way. So 1, 2, 3, like this, and look at where the arm is. Past the head like this and in a fist like this. 1, 2, in this way, like a barge Yiquan elbow, very similar to that concept. Just sets the posture differently. Well, we're not in horse stance for one thing. So 1, 2, like that, nice and relaxed. Still training, nice and relaxed. 1, 2. 1, 2. 1, 2. 1, 2. Other way, nice and relaxed. 1 quarter root, comes back flat, seeking step. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Into the thing like that. 1, 2, 3. See how close it's like. We haven't got time. That's why we need all these things like quarter rooting and hit and flow and things like that to maximise the time in situations like this where we haven't got the room for a big pullback. So still somewhere between quarter rooting and hit and flow. So it's not that high. It could go anywhere there. Into the chest is perfectly legitimate. You can always change it to something like that. And speed it up a little bit. Hit and flow. It's not that much difference. barge Yiquan pose finish. Still nice and relaxed. Finish like that. So one more thing that I wanted to look at, which I think is quite interesting. We've talked a lot about how we can move through articulated movement, move a big movement into another part of the body, particularly around the axis, to generate power, a similar amount of power, but making a movement physically smaller but with a similar amount of volume. You know, for example, we can take this movement and we can put more movement around the axis. We can move it from one place to another, usually move it into the Fa Li. So we're moving it more into the quintessence movement paradigm of Wushu, that we want to use Fa Li rather than using a push from the floor or a lean or something like that. It's a totally different method of power generation. So these people who say like Fa Li is just any fast movement, they are so far off the path. But anyway, one thing we haven't really looked at is when we do that the other way round, where we take the movement from the Fa Li and we put it back into a bigger movement. And there's a really good example of this that we use with elbows. And it's this kind of posture here, because and it's also partly about the sympathy of the movement. If I want to hit in with this part of the elbow here, by the time it's here, even with the step to add in a bit of compensatory force, there's still not as much power as we want to get out of that movement, because it makes us quite vulnerable to be like this anyway. So we want to generate a lot of power if we can with that posture. And so we take the movement back into the articulation, the bigger articulation. And we have to anyway, because we want to hit this point, so it's got to come round and hit. So we use this, we put the movement back out of it, just like that. We move that and change it back into the articulated movement with the elbow. We can do it pretty straightforwardly with a step, like that, and hitting. It's still not full power, just getting the feeling for the movement right. And you can see him stacking it, leaning back a little bit because it's so close. Otherwise, wouldn't even be able to get this. See, this is just adding more movement, more volume to the posture by leaning back. So, like that. If I do it like that, I can't get any power into the posture. So it's got to be stacked like that, in this way, like that. So we put the movement. We use this. It's a kind of screwing force around the shoulder, but we put the movement back into the articulated movement out of the Fa Li is actually minimal now in the posture, just a tiny little Fa Li. We put more movement back in the articulated. So we switched it around from the way that we normally do it. We normally make posture smaller and put more in the Fa Li, but this time we've made the posture bigger and put less in the Fa Li, because it's just the nature of the movement itself. It's sympathetic to doing it that way. It's quite an interesting, unusual example. Okay, that's it. Go and have a practice of those. Go and have a work on those. They're quite interesting. One love. I'll see you in the next one.